Before we get started on our next topic, what I would like you guys to do right now is to just take a look at the picture on your screen, the drawings, and summarize what you see occurring in the ecosystem that is drawn. So maybe give one or two words for each image and just summarize what you see happening from box 1 all the way through box 8. So take a minute right now, pause the video if you need to, and just summarize one or two words for each of those boxes. Okay, so hopefully what you've written down is something like the first one is a forest, the second box there's a fire, the fire burns down the forest, there's nothing left. In box 5 you see new organisms growing, plants, small plants. Then you get some larger plants. In box 7 you get some big trees. And in the last box, finally you have the same ecosystem that you started with in box 1. This process that you've just described is actually called succession. So our objective for this lesson is to be able to describe the process of succession and why it's important to ecosystems. So the basic definition of succession is pretty simple. All it means is a series of changes in an ecosystem where you have new organisms populating an area of space. Any ecosystem, doesn't matter what type it is, new organisms moving into that area would be considered succession. Okay, and generally it happens in stages. You can kind of look at the photo and see it starts with small plants, larger plants. Once you get some bigger plants in there, then you can have some animals come in and eat those plants. Larger animals come and eat the smaller animals, and so on until you have an actual stable, mature ecosystem. So why is succession important? Anytime there's any sort of disruption in an ecosystem, so this could be a natural disaster, this could be human actions, okay, succession takes place in order to get the ecosystem back to where it was before that disaster. Succession also happens when new land is formed. So pretty much every place that you've ever been, whatever that ecosystem looked like, it was formed by succession. Succession generally starts with species called pioneer species or pioneer organisms. And just like the pioneers were the first one here, right? Pioneer organisms are the first organisms to move into a new area. Usually, the two major pioneer organisms that we find are lichens and moss. And that's because those two species can actually grow without any soil at all. They actually help to make soil in the ecosystem. So if they're there first, they grow, there's no soil. As they grow and die and grow and die and grow and die, they actually make soil in which other plants can grow. The final product of succession is called a climax community. So this is just a stable, mature community. There's no changes going on. It's pretty set where it is, and there's not any changes that happen after this point. In Maryland, our climax community would be generally a deciduous forest. We do have some meadows, but generally, unless people go out there and keep cutting down the trees, eventually it will turn back into a forest. So there's an example of a climax community there. It doesn't look like that everywhere, but in Maryland, that's usually what you'll find. So if we want to look at succession a little bit closer, here's another diagram that we can see. Again, you start with bare rock at the beginning in this particular type of succession. And then your pioneer species, your lichens, move in. Then you start to get some small plants, grasses, finally you get some bigger shrubs, some trees, and again your climax community there is at the end. And if you look at the timeline on the bottom of this diagram, you can see this process can take hundreds of years. Sometimes it can even take thousands of years. So it's a very slow process. But again, all we mean here is just a series of changes that happen over time in the community until it reaches a stable climax community. So things that could cause succession. One example, volcanic lava flow. The Hawaiian Islands were all created by cooled lava. Okay, and now if you look at pictures of Hawaii, right, it's not just bare rock. There's beautiful plants and animals and all kinds of stuff there, and those all got there through the process of succession. So volcanic flow is one way that succession can be kick-started. Another one might be glaciers retreating, which is something that is unfortunately going to be happening a little bit more often here in your lifetime. But under glaciers is generally just bare rock. So once the glaciers melt and go away, again, you can get lichens and mosses moving in, and so on, and succession will take place. You have another type of succession that actually doesn't start with bare rock, but with dirt. So the dirt's already there. You don't necessarily need to know that the technical name for this is secondary succession, but it's good to know that there's two different types here. So this type of succession is when we talk about a disaster destroying a community and it has to kind of rebuild from there. So you can see we still have our soil. In this case, our disaster was a fire. This one doesn't take quite as long because the soil's already there. So this one takes, in this example, 150, maybe 200 years, compared to succession from bare rock's going to take 2, 3, 4, 5 times longer than that. So what could cause succession like this to happen? A fire, as shown in the previous example. It's a really common one. You get forest fires all the time. Some might be man-made, some might be just natural forest fires, lightning or that sort of thing. Another one might be farmland that's plowed and then left completely barren or empty, and eventually you'll have succession take place there as well. But you're starting with just soil. You're not starting with bare rock, but there's no plants there yet, so it is technically succession taking place. So one good thing about succession, its purpose kind of in ecosystems, is to help the ecosystem become healthier by creating biodiversity, which is a word you should have seen already. And if you remember, this just means the number of different species that live there. So the more species you have, the higher your biodiversity is. If you break it down, remember bio is life, diversity is differences, so lots of different life. If you have better biodiversity, then you can fill more niches or roles in the environment, and overall that leads to a healthier community. That's something, again, that we're reviewing from the first topic there. So remember, the bigger your ecosystem, the more species you have, the greater biodiversity, the more niches you have filled, right, the healthier your ecosystem is going to be. It's going to be able to adapt to change. For example, you have our food webs here, two separate ones. This food web, this ecosystem, has very low biodiversity. There's only 2 producers, 2 herbivores, and so on, okay? Over here, you have more than twice that number. If you look at this ecosystem here, let's say our little rabbit here gets hunted out by people, because rabbit tastes pretty good, by the way, if you didn't know, sorry. And all our rabbits go away, then what's going to happen to our other organisms here? Our plants might grow a little bit more, but our bird here is going to be in real trouble because it's the only thing that this coyote now has to eat. So our bird population is going to go down, coyote population is going to go down, and then our cougar population is also going to go down. Over here, if the same thing happened and we ate all the little rabbits, we still have 3 other herbivores that these consumers can eat. So more biodiversity, better ability to adapt to changes in the ecosystem. That's the main thing we're going for here. All right, last thing we want to add in is human impact. Mentioned a couple slides back, there are definitely ways that humans can cause succession to begin. You saw the example of the fires. Some of those are man-made, and also the land being plowed. Obviously, that's people doing that. But I'm going to give you an example of another one that actually happened back in 1986 in the Ukraine. If you guys have heard of that movie, The Chernobyl Diaries, it's supposed to be a horror movie. It's actually based on something that happened a long time ago. Like I said, 1986, there was a nuclear disaster at a power plant there. 350,000 people had to be relocated in less than 2 days because of this disaster. But what happened was, once all these people left, okay, there's the power plant there. Once all these people left, the ecosystem kind of started to take over. So you can see here the map of where this actually took place. That little black dot there is the Chernobyl plant. And all this area around it was subjected to radiation, which is really unhealthy for living organisms. So people weren't allowed to live in this big area all around the power plant for a long, long time. Even now you can see this marked in orange or red or whatever you want to call it. People still aren't allowed to live there. So what started happening is that since people were no longer there, then the plants and animals started taking back over the city. So you can see the before here when people lived there, and now since people have been gone for 30 years or so, more than 30 years, the trees are moving back in, you're getting animals moving back in. Here's another picture there of succession happening here. And there's actually been some good things happening for animals in the area since then. The European lynx is actually an endangered species, just like a really big bobcat. And it is moving back into the area now because it has this big wide open area where there's no people where it can live. And it was starting to run out of places that it could live. So succession is good for the ecosystem. Unfortunately, in this case, it happened because of something that we unintentionally did. But really interesting stuff here. So here's a good example of succession with Chernobyl. And there's some really interesting pictures. If you search online, you can find some more. There was actually a carnival that was set up there that was supposed to be starting in the day or two after the explosion happened. So we have, you know, the bumper cars and Ferris wheels and that sort of thing. So really interesting stuff. Make sure that you filled out all of your notes. And once you've finished up, go ahead and move on to the next thing in your packet.